Welcome to Right vs. Left News, your daily briefing on the stories that matter, told from both sides of the aisle. I'm your AI host, Chris, and each day I bring you the most important political and cultural news, with perspectives from conservative and progressive voices. No spin, no agenda, just the facts and the opinions that shape our national conversation. Let's dive in. Here's what we're watching today. The White House is pressuring credit card companies with a proposed 10% interest cap. A federal judge in Boston plans to temporarily block the termination of a key family reunification parole program. Iran has plunged into a sweeping internet blackout as protests widen. In California, a one-time billionaire wealth tax proposal is reigniting the tech flight versus safety net debate, and the administration is prepping a housing affordability order that could include 50-year mortgages, curbs on institutional homebuyers, and fresh mortgage bond purchases. Major outlets are tracking the latest. Before we jump into today's stories, a quick word from our sponsors.
This episode is brought to you by Family GPT, the AI chat platform actually designed for kids. If your children are curious about ChatGPT, but you're worried about what they might see, Family GPT gives you full parental controls, content filtering, and the ability to align responses with your family's values. Whether Christian, Muslim, Jewish, secular, and many more. Monitor every conversation, set usage limits, and let your kids explore AI safely. No ads, no data selling, complete privacy. Sign up free at familygpt.chat.
Thanks to our sponsors for supporting Right vs. Left News. Now let's get to the headlines. President Trump proposed a one-year cap at 10% on credit card interest rates, starting January 20th. He offered few enforcement details, and analysts say Congress may be needed to make a cap truly binding. Banking groups warn it could restrict access to credit, while supporters argue it would relieve households paying 20% to 30% APR. On the right, conservative and market-oriented voices caution that rate caps act like price controls, shrinking credit for riskier borrowers and pushing them toward costlier options. Critics like Steve Moore say the policy could backfire. Some allies see the appeal for an affordability message, yet still question how it would work in practice. On the left, progressives have long pushed caps. Senators Bernie Sanders and Josh Hawley, an unusual left-right pairing, proposed a 10% ceiling last year, arguing banks are gouging consumers. Supporters say a cap would save indebted cardholders thousands and force issuers to compete on service and fees instead of sky-high APR. There's bipartisan interest, even as the details remain fuzzy. A federal judge in Boston, Indira Talwani, says she will issue a temporary restraining order pausing the administration's plan to terminate family reunification parole programs for nationals of 7 Latin American and Caribbean countries, protections that were set to end January 14th. She criticized the lack of direct notice to affected families. On the right, supporters of ending the parole programs argue they were vulnerable to fraud and functioned as categorical workarounds to immigration law. The Department of Homeland Security frames termination as a national security and integrity measure. Critics on the right say the judge's move could extend protections beyond what the law intended. On the left, immigrant rights advocates say families followed the rules and built lives under government promises, and that due process and written notice are the bare minimum. They argue the programs offered a safe, orderly alternative to dangerous routes. Coverage of the hearing emphasized the judge's focus on fairness and process. Iran has imposed a sweeping, highly precise internet shutdown as anti-government protests, sparked by economic collapse, enter a second week. Rights groups report dozens killed and thousands detained. Authorities blame foreign enemies. Network monitors say traffic fell to near zero. On the right, many urge strong support for demonstrators and tougher pressure on Tehran, seeing the blackout as cover for violent repression. United States officials have voiced support, Secretary of State Marco Rubio among them, and President Trump warned Iran's leaders against shooting protesters. On the left, human rights advocates emphasize avoiding military escalation while rallying international condemnation, humanitarian support, and efforts to pierce the blackout. Groups like Amnesty International are calling for urgent diplomatic action and restoration of internet access, with attention on the civilian toll. We'll be right back with more of today's news after this brief message.
This episode is brought to you by Family GPT, the AI chat platform actually designed for kids. If your children are curious about ChatGPT, but you're worried about what they might see, Family GPT gives you full parental controls, content filtering, and the ability to align responses with your family's values. Whether Christian, Muslim, Jewish, secular, and many more. Monitor every conversation, set usage limits, and let your kids explore AI safely. No ads, no data selling, complete privacy. Sign up free at familygpt.chat.
Thanks again to our sponsors. Now back to the news. California's proposed 2026 Billionaire Tax Act, a one-time 5% levy on residents worth $1 billion or more, has ignited a fierce fight in tech and political circles. The measure aims to raise roughly $100 billion, mostly for healthcare. Some tech leaders are reportedly shifting entities or relocating. Governor Gavin Newsom opposes the tax, while Representative Ro Khanna backs it. On the right, critics call it confiscatory and self-defeating, likely to accelerate the flight of capital and talent, depress investment, and trigger long legal battles. Editorial boards warn about revenue overestimates and economic damage, with predictions of valuation disputes and constitutional challenges. On the left, supporters counter that it's a targeted, one-time measure to backstop essential services after federal cuts. Many billionaires built fortunes in California, and they argue, can contribute more in a crisis. Progressive economists also contend that so-called billionaire flight is often overstated. The administration is drafting a housing affordability order with pieces that could debut at Davos. Ideas under consideration include 50-year mortgages, limits on institutional investors buying single-family homes, and using Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to buy more mortgage-backed securities to push down rates. Reporting also points to active MBS purchases and market effects. On the right, some conservatives like efforts that target supply constraints and investor dominance, but many slam 50-year mortgages as a debt trap that inflates prices unless permitting and construction get fixed. The view: longer terms raise lifetime interest costs. Zoning reform and faster building should come first. On the left, progressive housing advocates see promise in curbing Wall Street ownership and easing down payment hurdles, but warn that demand-side boosts without new supply risk another price surge. There's an active debate over federal versus local roles, and over how any investor limits would be enforced. The White House is pressing card issuers with a 10% cap. A Boston court is pausing the end of family reunification parole. Iran's blackout underscores a deepening crackdown. California's billionaire tax fight previews a 2026 ballot clash, and a sweeping housing plan is taking shape, part financial engineering, part market reform. We'll keep tracking the facts and the arguments as they evolve. That's it for today's episode of Right versus Left News. Remember, understanding both sides isn't about picking a team, it's about being informed. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and join us tomorrow for another balanced look at the day's biggest stories. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.